15th August 1947 dawned with the dual reality of India's independence from British colonialism and the partition of the subcontinent. The cartographic fragmentation of India was executed on the lines of religious demography, resulting in a tragedy of disproportionate magnitude. Although numbers vary, it is estimated that nearly 14 million people were forced to migrate and more than 1 million people perished in the process. Fear of religious persecution, ethnic cleansing, violence, loss of equal opportunity and livelihood contributed to what has been described as the largest forced migration and displacement known in the human history. As India observes the 75th anniversary of our independence and partition, we acknowledge that migration and refugee crisis continues to be a pressing issue owing to the political instability witnessed in our neighborhood. While partition led to the first wave of forced migration or displacement, creation of Bangladesh in 1971 following the civil war in Pakistan registered the second large influx of refugees, and the legacy continues in the form of communal disturbances and displacement trends recorded till date. Other major instances of migration to India from the neighborhood include over 100,000 Tibetan refugees to India after Chinese annexation of Tibet in 1951, 70,000 Tamil refugees from the civil war in Sri Lanka in the 1980s, Rohingya refugees in the aftermath of 2016 genocide in Myanmar, and the Afghan refugees from the 1980s in the wake of Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, and more recently after the Taliban takeover of 2021. The focus of this paper, however, will be restricted to the microhistory of the first generation of refugees who were displaced forcibly from their ancestral lands during the partition of India in 1947. Although regarded as the largest forced displacement hitherto known, partition remained unnoticed by the United Nations as it remained preoccupied by efforts of rehabilitating refugees of World War II. The 1951 UN Refugee Convention was dedicated to protecting European refugees, and thus partition refugees in India were not included in the mandate. The 1967 protocol amended the scope of the convention's applicability, and thus the UNHCR registry acknowledges only refugees who migrated from Pakistan to India after the creation of Bangladesh in 1971. My engagement with the topic is both personal and academic. Being the daughter of Hindu Bengali immigrants from East Pakistan, who built a new identity for themselves in India, I have been deeply inspired by my parents' struggle. Academically, I have been intrigued by the inner conflicts and contradictions faced by the generation in traveling back and forth between the two realities. The first being their attachment to the ancestral land that they were forced to leave behind, and second being their resolve in rebuilding their homes in the new adoptive land. The history of the events that led to partition of India is beyond the scope of this paper. Yet to contextualize the subsequent oral testimonies, I will highlight that the root cause of the partition crisis is primarily attributed to the ill-conceived and hasty execution of British exit plan from India after 200 years of colonization. Cyril Radcliffe, a British lawyer who had never been east of Paris and had no prior knowledge of India's geographical or administrative complexities, was given the task of drafting the partition map. Radcliffe first visit to India was in July 1947, and he was given a time of only 5 weeks to carry out the stupendous task. Although it was decided that geographically contiguous Hindu majority areas would remain with India and Muslim majority areas would be awarded to Pakistan, the Boundary Commission, under the chairmanship of Ratcliffe, had allowed for other factors that were loosely defined. For instance, the Muslim majority district of Bengal, namely Murshidabad, was integrated with India, while the Hindu dominated district of Khulna and Buddhist dominated areas of Chittagong tracts were awarded to Pakistan. The arbitrariness of the Ratcliffe Award resulted in uncertainty in people's mind about their state identity and fear that they might turn out to be a religious minority in the new land. I've interviewed a total of 80 citizens who witnessed 15th August 1947 and the prevailing atmosphere of communal animosity. However, not every individual was impacted directly by partition. Thus, I have analysed only the oral testimonies of 25 witnesses who were directly displaced from East Pakistan to India. My findings led me to 4 broad deductions. Deduction 1: an irreconcilable loss of home and identity was the immediate consequence of the ill-conceived Ratcliffe Award. The mapping of borders left people in agony and uncertainty about their future status. Arun Basu narrated that amidst the din and confusion, we were not sure whether the districts of Jashore and Khulna would be retained in India or would become a part of Pakistan. On 15th August 1947, we were glorious Indians celebrating independence from the British. But as the ominous clock ticked away, my homeland Jashore was awarded to Pakistan. Atul Pal recollected that as a 10-year-old, he and his schoolmates hoisted the Indian tricolored flag and made salutations to Mother India, but with the announcement of Ratcliffe Award on 17th August, found that his ancestral land Khulna, a Hindu-dominated district, had been awarded to Pakistan. Like Basu and Pal, millions fled from their ancestral land amidst riots, abduction and violence. For no fault of ours, we had become refugees and underwent unimaginable hardships, echoed Minoti Roy Chowdhury, as she recounted how no one was there to clarify why her hometown Borishal had been awarded to Pakistan. Shri Aurobindo Chowdhury, a nonagenarian, has never reconciled to the realities of partition and remarked, "Morally, I do not accept partition till date." Chowdhury had personally pleaded with Gandhiji to campaign against partition and refused to take part in any Independence Day celebrations. Instead, he organized a protest rally where more than 300 citizens marched with black flags and demonstrated against India's partition. Deduction 2: women refugees experienced dehumanization and disempowerment. Women were worst hit in the process of displacement. In addition to accounts of abduction, rape, violence, and aggression by rioters and armed militia, instances of the distressed women committing suicide or being killed by immediate relatives to save the family's honor have been reported. The physical and psychological brutalities incurred have left indelible scars and haunting experiences in the survivors even to this day. A survivor who wished not to be named narrated an instance of how her all-female family, comprising of a widowed mother, 2 aunts, and herself aged 17 and unmarried then, was attacked by a mob carrying weapons in her native village in Maimanching. It was dusk and we were about to perform the Sandhya Arati. Sandhya Arati is the Hindu evening ritual, when more than 50 men charged into their courtyard. Some of the attackers carried weapons, and we could identify some of them as our neighbors, she narrated. The 3 elderly widows negotiated the term of not being touched in exchange of every tangible asset that they possessed. We handed over the keys and disappeared in the darkness of night, empty-handed and in a single wear, never to return to our ancestral land, she narrated. After 3 horrific days, the women reached a railway station in India and became refugees forever. Anjali Tolapatro recollected how she and other Hindu girls of her neighborhood stopped going to school, apprehending lawlessness and chaos. There was an air of distrust and disharmony everywhere. Riots broke out, and we felt trapped like rats at home, Talapatra recounted. Talapatra has lived her life always fearing the worst, and incidences of gender violence triggers old wounds witnessed in the backdrop of partition. Jharna Sinha narrated how violence against women became a means to attack the enemy. People were fear-stricken and sent their elderly daughters to India with single wear and minimal jewelry. Sinha further recollects, I was hardly 12 and the security guard searched me in person. I felt disgusted. Our bags and baggage were thrown and left scattered all around. I could only bring 1 pair of bangles. In traditional Hindu society, the only assets that women could inherit consisted of the family jewelry known as Stridhan. Thus, loot and arson of jewelry was viewed as a serious means to disempower women from their traditional inheritance. While Sinha was able to bring only a pair of bangle from her Stridhan, Dilip Roy's narration was a contrast. Roy narrated, our family took a chartered flight from Dhaka to Calcutta. We were carrying 2 big boxes full of my mother's and widowed elder sister's jewelry. Both the boxes and every piece of jewelry in them was confiscated in Dhaka airport by the airport staff and the Pakistani officers. Roy's widowed sister, till her last days, was in severe pain and suffered financial insecurity by the loss of her Sridhan. Deduction 3. The refugees were not welcome in their new settlements. Partition survivors experienced poverty and a sense of not belonging to the landscape of India, and their new settlements in refugee camps or squatters' colonies. Not all could be accommodated in the state-run refugee camps, which were overpopulated, and the trauma of homelessness inflicted them with sufferings and mental agony beyond comprehension. Some of them managed to stay with their acquaintances and relatives already living across borders, while most were left in destitution. Dulin Dam's family settled in a refugee camp in Ranaghat, some 40 kilometers away from Kolkata. Dam reported, we fled from Khulna to reach Shialda station in Calcutta, from where we were deported to the PL refugee camp. Dam's Bengali accent was different from the locals living near the camp, and as a result of which the young boy felt alienated and bullied by other boys in his school and neighborhood. A similar narrative was also shared by Amitava Gupta. As a new kid in school, all other boys were curiously surrounding me. I kept my mouth shut, since I thought, as soon as I speak, they would know I come from the other side of the border. I had still not learned the local dialect, but very soon the other kids figured out that I am a refugee. Gupta narrated. One day Gupta found, etched on the blackboard of his classroom, Bangals. Bangals mean migrants from East Pakistan. It's a colloquial. So Bangals will forcefully sit beside us and cling on permanently. They are not to return to their homeland. And emotional Gupta further continued, most of the people harbored such feelings towards us, and not just the kids in school. A deep sense of rootlessness crept in when labelled as refugees. Gupta felt discriminated against when refugees were deprived of financial security, job opportunities, a decent home, and dignity of life. Gupta draws a parallel of his experience with those of the people from East Germany migrating to the West after German unification and the breakdown of the Berlin Wall. People rarely accept and accommodate outsiders and fail to understand that refugees are not responsible for their plight. Refugees, in most cases, are forcibly displaced. They have no choice and are left insecure. Deduction 4. Distinguishing statehood from nationhood. The partition survivors made a clear distinction between state and nation. Paresh Chandra Majumdar narrated, Noakhali is my ancestral land, my home, my nation, and India is the state to which I have been forced to migrate to adapt and accommodate. Ashish Ranjan Roy stated, my homeland is now a foreign land and we have become citizens of India. I have spent most of my life in India and will continue to do so until I die, but deep in my heart, I long for my ancestral village, Athorobari, in the other side of the border. This phenomenon of displacement continues to cause despair and discontent till date. While interacting with partition survivors and their families, I found two distinguishing processes eminent. While the younger members who were born in India after 1947 used the terms state and nation interchangeably and discussed the state building processes in India, which included building infrastructure, institutions, science, technology, economy, and even space research. The generation of partition survivors not only distinguished nation from state, but underlined the need to build a nation state based on a more positive and coherent national identity. In conclusion, I would say that in the absence of extensive documentation and official memorials, the individual memories of partition survivors serve as an important source of the lived experience. My purpose of taking up this project was, first, to preserve the oral testimonies of the generation at the micro level, reflecting on their mental health due to the forced displacement. And second was to reach out to the youth in particular, with the purpose of creating awareness and empathy in them for the generation who, in spite of being uprooted, have immensely contributed in building a new nation. The refugees from East Pakistan included in this study largely adapted themselves in West Bengal and other parts of India. After an initial struggle of 10 to 15 years, the focused generation were able to attain financial stability and build their homes on their own without much support from the state. While the partition survivors have worked hard to undo the sufferings of displacement and marginalization, the trauma of losing their homeland and childhood finds mention in every account. As Sanjeev Sannal summarized, we were expected to build our lives anew, like the proverbial phoenix in India, but we could not never return to our homeland once again. My findings from the interviews also revealed that the focused generation predates the phenomena globalization and displacement. Yet, they indirectly become subjects of this world order. They have been displaced twice. First, during partition, when it was forcible and as a result of a political cause. Second, involuntary, if not forcible, in most of the respondents, when their next generation migrated from home in search of better opportunities. The younger members in their household have largely wiped out their distinctive cultural affinities and identified with pan-Indian cosmopolitanism. The focus generation has been subjected to the process of migration and displacement for too long.